Daniel Gilad is a sound engineer and music producer that has been working in the industry for over a decade.
Music for me is about creating relationships through sound. Each piece of music has its own personality, quality, and design. It is a reflection of the artist's soul and a small window to their story.
Daniel has provided services for live sound, studio production, mixing, and mastering to some of Hawaii's finest artists.
It is my job to be able to translate it and shape it to be shared with the world.
Traveling the globe has exposed Daniel to a variety of music, cultures, and relationships. He brings this breadth of perspectives and experiences to his craft and has worked in many different genres, including folk, rock, hip-hop, world, pop, sound healing, and meditation. Contact Daniel at dgsoundcreations.com to learn more about how he can help you with your next creative project. dgsoundcreations.com for all of your audio production needs.
I am pleased and honored to provide post-production services to What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast.
This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast. I am your host, Josh Rapun. We are well into season 2 and super happy to be on the air bringing you another series of interviews this winter-spring of 2021. The gods willing, at least here in Hawaii, the light at the end of the COVID tunnel is getting brighter, which makes it a unique moment to talk about education. This series, now halfway through its second season, has garnered well over 21,000 downloads. We thank you, listeners. We will continue to bring you the stories of agile, adaptive, and innovative public charter, and private school educators and education leaders until we have achieved 1,000 points of light. We are many va'a, one voyage, all in it for all kids on all islands. Today, my guest is Robert Pennybacker, the Vice President of Learning Initiatives at PBS Hawaii and the driving force behind Hiki No, one of the most unique, student-driven, and authentic learning programs on planet Earth. This is no joke, listeners. I am not engaging in hyperbole. There are lots of student news programs around the nation, but none with the mission and vision nor the scope and reach of Hiki No. This program's impact on kids is simply staggering. And today we're going to hear how it was built and what drove Robert to move it forward. Robert Pennybacker's resume is long and deep. Early on, he was a local television marketing director. A few decades back, he formed Pennybacker Creative Inc., wherein he conceptualized, wrote, produced, and directed commercials and other marketing creative for notable businesses and nonprofits in the islands. Robert is an independent filmmaker who has written more than 20 documentaries about life and people in Hawaii. He is also a poet and a writer. In 2007, he became the Vice President of Creative Services at PBS Hawaii and oversaw all local programming, on-air promotion, interstitial production, station branding, and the production of on-air fundraising for the station, as well as management of personnel. Oh yes, during this time, he helped launch Hiki No, the nation's first statewide student news network. Robert and I go back pretty far. We played high school football together back in the 70s at Punahou School. He was a tight end, I played center, which makes this moment very special for me. And now, here's my conversation with Robert Pennybacker. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Robert, I want to start by looking down from the 10,000-foot level, if you will, on the life and times so far of Robert Pennybacker.
Okay.
So you've been a poet, a documentary writer, a filmmaker, a producer, a project manager, a creative. In other words, you have made many things with your hands and your mind and your heart, many, many things. And
Yeah.
I know it's hard.
Not so much my hands. I'm not too good with my hands.
Well, I mean, you're managing buttons and things like that, so there's some manipulation with your hands. But so I know it's hard to select a favorite. But looking down on you, describe one or two things you were most proud of in your life. The couple things that you would want mentioned, for example, inside a book jacket in the biography written about you.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. It is interesting because I haven't really thought of this, but I was the not the only producer, but I would say the finishing producer, writer, director of a documentary called "Living You're Dying," which was about end of life issues, and the main character was a real person, Dr. Mitsuo Oki, who was really a pioneer in the hospice movement and end of life treatment movement in Hawaii. He's since passed away, and that stands out because I think I was really needed to finish the project. It apparently had been in production for 10 years before I came on board, and I kind of joke, but I think I was the last producer in Hawaii to have worked on it. But it was a very meaningful film for me, and I think it's had a lot of impact on a lot of people. The other thing in my career that's almost the polar opposite was I was the marketing director in charge of when KHON, where I was working at the time, switched network affiliations from NBC to Fox. Which doesn't sound like a big deal now, but back then, this was in 1996, it was a big deal. It hadn't happened much at all in the country. And I think it stands out to me because the rest of the station really thought that this was going to be the end of KHON's dominance, that it was going to be like the Titanic. We were going to sink down to the bottom of the ocean. And almost the opposite happened. So I guess those two things stand out because they had an impact on a lot of people.
What work did you do at KHON during that switch that helped ensure that KHON would continue forward and not sink like the Titanic?
I was the promotions director or the marketing director. So my job, with a very small department, myself and three other employees, was basically to increase the ratings as much as possible. That's the job of that role. Through marketing, through advertising, through promotion, through spreading the word. Whatever you can do.
And was there a moment, Robert, along that pathway where you started to realize that your team's efforts was kind of changing the mindset of everybody else at KHON? Like, the ship's not going down. We're actually going to keep moving forward.
No, that was the interesting thing. It didn't change the mindset until the Nielsen book came out. So it was really one of those situations where everyone was disbelievers until the proof came out,
Right.
And the numbers don't. Well, I don't know if the numbers don't lie, but the numbers get printed and are followed. And one of the most vocal non-believers was Joe Moore, the anchor.
Right.
And I remember I had the pleasure of I won't say throwing, but putting that Nielsen book on his desk and saying, "Hey Joe, check these numbers out. They actually turn out pretty good." And but so it was I guess a combination. I don't know why that stands out, but yeah, maybe a combination of just being and I didn't have a choice, being a believer, amidst a sea of non-believers, and then proving them wrong.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, Robert, you graduated from Punahou in 1974, 2 years ahead of me, which means you had some of the same teachers I did and likely took some of the same classes. So, describe for our listeners the bridge between your experiences at Punahou and your decision to enter the University of Southern California's Cinema Production School, from which you graduated magna cum laude.
I had a lot of good teachers at Punahou. I think that was one of the benefits of that school, but none really was mentoring me in terms of being a filmmaker. There really wasn't a filmmaking class. There was a course called Novel to Film where we would watch movies and then read the novels that the movies were based on and analyze them. That was my teacher was Dr. Schliemann, terrific teacher. But my inspiration was more, making movies with my friends, and just really. I'd always been into movies. I was a child of television. The TV was my babysitter, as the case for many in my generation. But I got serious about movies when. I have to say one of the key inspirations was my mom. My mom, I don't know if she was a movie buff, but she would buy me books about filmmakers, which was kind of interesting. And in a lot of the cases, back then there was no Netflix. There weren't even DVDs or VHS. It was hard to see movies, hard to see. Rare movies. You might catch them on late night TV or the Film Society at UH Manoa. I have to really credit them.
Yeah, right.
So I think it was a combination of that. I had a group of friends that we were into it, and we made Super 8 movies, and my mom and the films I got to see. But I will say at Punahou, the teachers who influenced me were more about the English teachers and philosophy. So it's kind of getting my mind ready for that kind of activity, creativity. But not specifically film.
But you mean sort of preparing you as a storyteller, but not specifically film yet?
Yeah.
Wow, that's super interesting, Robert, because I also took the same course, novel and film. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I had the other teacher, Doc Barry.
Oh, I remember him.
Yeah, and I've actually talked about that experience with other guests on this podcast, that was a transformative experience for me, that I had the opportunity to make my first film in that class using a Super 8 camera. And I turned a James Thurber fable, The Unicorn in the Garden, into a live action film, and with Doc's guidance. And then that was the first real project-based learning, before we ever started talking about it in those terms, experience that I had. So that's like interesting. And so when you decided to go to USC Film School, that was a very deliberate decision on your part?
Oh, yeah. I applied to the other known film schools, NYU, Columbia, even though they weren't really known for film, they had a film program, Columbia University in New York, and UC Boulder, which had more of a well-known media program, not just specifically film.
Right.
And USC.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, what was your experience like at USC Film School? Like what was it like?
It was great. It was really interesting. It was sort of a lot of ups and downs. There were a lot of pluses and a lot of minuses. I think the main plus was it was a great school, I have to say. If you wanted to live, eat, and breathe film, that was the place to be. I think one of the benefits was being with peers, and if if you applied to film school, it wasn't a normal thing to do. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm going to be pre-med because my dad's a doctor, or
Right.
it would. So you kind of had to be a fanatic or a nerd, and so you're just amongst all these other film nerds, and so it was a great experience to have that 4.5 years. I didn't quite make it in 4 years of being with others who were just totally into what you're into, and the teachers and the resources. One of the things about that school was, and there was some things that weren't so good about it, and was being in Los Angeles, and there were really strong ties to the traditional film industry there, the studios, and so big time movie makers would come to screen their movies at the school before they hit the theaters. And so not only would you see these movies before they hit the theaters, but you would see the director or whomever.
Wow.
And some of my heroes. So I remember seeing, and this was it was a class, but everyone would come. That was the other nice thing too, is that tuition was expensive, but you could monitor other classes that you weren't paying for.
What was one big film that you got to see before everybody else saw it?
Well, it was John Cassavetes, one of my heroes, and he premiered, or he showed A Woman Under the Influence, starring his wife Jenna Rollins, which is arguably one of the best female performances of all time in the movies. And they were there. They were there. John Cassavetes and Jenna Rollins.
Wow, that sounds like magic.
Yeah, and it was an incredible movie. Another one was Alfred Hitchcock, the old master, showing his last movie. I don't know if he knew it was his last movie, Family Plot. Right. Not one of his best movies, but he was there in the flesh.
Wow, Robert, that's amazing.
Funny guy, really. He wanted to make the audience laugh. That's basically what was his
right.
Seemed to be his MO that night.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, Robert, I want to talk about your time in the 1980s at KGMB, a local television news station. Back in the day, was called KGMB, is now Hawaii News Now. It's a combination of a couple stations that came together. You were a staff director and writer, and you wrote and directed all sorts of TV productions about culture and comedy and music. So let's pretend, Robert, you have an audience of public, private, and charter school kids who are all interested in storytelling and the creative arts. And they're sitting in front of you, and you got the mic. They want to know, Robert, what are the skills and habits and dispositions of people who succeed in these arts? Like, what are they?
Well, I think for me, but I think it's pretty common. I think the main skill is writing. Regardless of whether it's a visual medium that doesn't end up on the page. If you're on the creative end, writing is going to be involved. And I think that was my strength. But it really depends on. I guess I would tell them, try things out, figure out what you really like, what part of it you really like, what part that really turns you on, that makes you passionate about it, and pursue that. For me, it was the writing side, but for others, obviously, it was camera work or editing. I think the great thing about this field is that it taps into a real array of talents. And I think think there's too much emphasis sometimes on being good at everything, being a generalist. It's actually good to try everything out, to find out what you're not good at, or what you definitely believe others are better at, that you would rather work with them, and find out what you're good at and what you like, because that's just going to drive you. It's a cliche, but it's true. If you love what you do, it's not work. And the other thing about that is because it's not work, you're gonna put in more time into it beyond the clock, and that's what's going to help you succeed.
Right. That's so awesome. We're going to come back to that specialist versus generalist thing a little bit later in the hour. But I wonder, Robert, about like what you seem to be saying here, subtext, but maybe not subtext, is that rarely in the creative arts are you doing anything specifically alone. That almost everything that you would do within the creative arts means that you're going to be part of some sort of a team endeavor where people are playing different roles: the writer, the producer, the organizer, et cetera. Is that generally true when you go into the creative arts? Is that you're not doing it alone? You're doing it as part of a larger team effort?
Well, I guess that depends. I would think maybe a writer for the page would be pretty much alone until, and then maybe someone in the fine arts, a painter or a sculptor.
Yeah.
But then they're down the road. If you're a writer and you're serious about it and you're making a living, you're going to come across an editor.
Right.
And then maybe with those art forms, maybe the real collaboration then is with the audience, because it's really just you and the audience. And I guess the editor is maybe your first audience,
Right.
So those are different in that regard, but yeah, there still are others involved. A painting maybe doesn't really exist until other people see it. So I would say it's not a blanket thing. I think those are the solo arts. In which case the audience becomes the main collaborator,
right?
And then the more the team arts, yeah.
Right. So, Robert, along the same lines, let's also pretend you have an audience of educators in media programs from around the state sitting in front of you, and you've got the mic and you're talking to them. What is your message to them? What are the skills, habits, and dispositions of a successful K-12 media educator? Wow,
I marvel at that, because I don't think I could do that. I'm so impressed by teachers.
What is
just from what I've observed? I would think that it's not specific to teaching media. I think the thing would be, you have to be a kind of person that can connect with your student. Well, maybe more so in the media arts. The idea of you being the teacher, espousing the rules of whatever art form you're teaching from above, and having the students, pick up the scraps of your knowledge
right.
and treasure them. I don't think it works, at least from what I can see. I think it's the ability to see in a student, what their gift is, what they have to offer, and to maybe reflect that back to them, and tell them, hey, you're pretty good at this, and I can help. Maybe I can help you, because I really see a lot of potential in you, and here's some tips to help you along the way. But I think that connection of I think wanting to be believed in, is really important.
So it sort of begs the question of, I'm sure your audience members would ask, like, well, so what are some first steps in terms of getting to know who my students are? Like, how do I start to make that connection with them? I bet you've observed that over your time working with educators.
Mm-hmm. I would say it comes out from the work.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's any real formula for it, but set up exercises, set up projects, and get them doing it. Regardless of what knowledge or skills they have to come into it with,
mm-hmm.
and just observe and see what happens.
Yeah, and coach and guide and mentor and sponsor and listen, right?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at a story that a video story that students have made, I think the best thing a teacher could do in that situation is to be the best, the most informed audience, because really in the end, that's what everyone is working towards. So I tell teachers, a lot of media teachers in Hawaii, the ones that I work with through Hikino, don't come from the field. That's just a reality. But I don't think that that's a hindrance if they can be the best audience member that you can be, and then just basically reflect back to the student.
Right.
I'm watching this, and I can't follow it. Something happened here with the logic that lost me, or that's brilliant, or that made me laugh, whatever.
Yeah.
It's that feedback to the work, because when you're doing work, you really have no idea what's coming out. You're just trying your best and doing what you think is going to work. But until you have an observer, an objective viewer, watching it and giving you feedback, you really don't know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's awesome, Robert. So, hey, everybody, let's take a minute to reintroduce today's guest. Robert Pennybacker is the Vice President of Learning Initiatives at PBS Hawaii and the Symphony Director orchestrating Hikino, one of the most unique, student-driven, and authentic learning programs on planet Earth, in my humble opinion. So, Robert, at its official website, we can read Hikino, and I quote, Hikino, Hawaii's new wave of storytellers, teaches elementary, middle, and high school students how to create PBS quality news features that reach a statewide audience on PBS Hawaii and a worldwide audience on pbshawaii.org. So in the process, students acquire the life skills needed to succeed in college and career. So 2 parts to this question. What do the words PBS quality mean? And what does it look and sound and feel like to hold kids accountable to these quality standards?
It's funny when you bring that up, the PBS standards. I just had a funny experience with we've been interviewing some of our funders as part of our 10th anniversary celebration for Hikino. Mm-hmm. And one of our longtime funders is this woman, Dot Mason, who is the widow of George Mason, the publisher of PBN. Mm-hmm. And I asked her at the end, after the Hikino questions, well, why do you support PBS? And she said, well, it's very simple. You don't air dumb stuff. You don't air stupid stuff. and I don't like stupid stuff. It is. It's hard to. Well, there is one very specific thing on the journalism end of it, and it's very specific. And there's something called the PBS Red Book that has these standards. And your content, if it's based in real life, if it's nonfiction, if it's news or journalism, has to be fair, has to be balanced. You cannot take one side and just advocate for it. That mm-hmm. actually cannot air. If something like that airs and someone calls you on it, you could bad things could happen to the station. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the most specific standard. The other is it's a gut thing, but it's called quality, and I think the job previous to this job I had now was running the local programming department at PBS Hawaii. So it was many other shows other than Hikino. Mm-hmm. And I just I don't know how others do it, but I just have this gut. This little man that was in a movie, Double Indemnity. This little man talks to me and says, "This just should not be on PBS. This is not good." So it really is. What is good television and what is not? And it sounds really arbitrary, but when you get in a position like this, you develop a sense for that. It's really a sense of it's respecting the audience. It's respecting the audience, the intelligence of the audience, mm-hmm. and not pandering, because your motive, your reason for being on the air, is solely to impact the audience, to entertain them, to inform them, to inspire them, mm-hmm. and not to sell anything.
Mm. So, Robert, if I'm a student, I'm a student journalist who's participating in the program. Like, how do I go about getting that little man to talk to me?
I think that's where the feedback comes in. It's really hard to define it. So, we have a handbook. In our handbook, it doesn't say don't do this and do that. And so that's really where the what makes Hikino unique is that we have a team of industry professionals who are giving feedback to the students' work mm-hmm. Through every draft. And it's that feedback that's saying, this really isn't working. This isn't appropriate. This could be better. And I think that, as I'd mentioned a while ago, feedback is really the best tool, really the only tool, I think, mm-hmm. because you can put out all the theories you want, but until then something specific comes up that doesn't fit in any theory,
right?
It has to be that specific feedback, mm-hmm. and letting them know the why, why isn't this working?
Yeah, we Robert, that my day job at Apple, we have something that we call the feedback quadrant. So in the 4 different quadrants, there's positive generic, which isn't very useful. I could say Robert is awesome, but that doesn't really, explain much. And then I could also negative generic, which would be, Robert is a pain in the neck, and that doesn't really mean anything either. So when you get into the positive specific and the negative specific, then you're starting to talk about exactly what you mean, the why behind a piece of feedback. Like, mm-hmm. the logic of this sequence that you're laying out in this film doesn't quite work, and then blah, 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 right?
Yeah. And I think you touched on something really important. The general feedback that you just mentioned can get real personal, right?
Yeah.
On the one side, it's rewarding, and so you're stroking someone's ego.
Yeah.
And I don't know what good that does. And then on the other time, people could take it as I'm bad,
Yeah.
I'm a bad filmmaker, and that really doesn't come out because, and that's the beauty of it. It's all about the work, And so, if the students and the teachers can get into that zone, it can get very productive. Where
yeah.
You don't take this personally because it isn't you. It's the work we're talking about.
Yeah. Right.
And the whole the mission of the whole team, whatever parts they're playing, is to make that work mm-hmm. the best possible.
Right.
And then I think after it's done and they succeed, then the compliments can come.
Sure.
Say, you're brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. So, follow-up question to that is, and you and I have talked about this before, going way, way back when we were first discussing, airing Ted Dintersmith's film Most Likely to Succeed on PBS Hawaii. We for more than 100 years, Robert, education is focused not so much on life skills, but job ready, like factory or professional skills. So it's really remarkable to me that your banner paragraph puts life skills front and center on the Hikino site. Like, what are the life skills that you're talking about, and how does Hikino help kids develop them?
They keep coming up. I think we learned this from the teachers, that the first couple seasons, when Hikino was created, I don't think we had these life skills in mind necessarily. Mm-hmm. And it was the teachers that saying, my students are learning all these things by doing this. And it's teamwork, it's collaboration, because it is a team sport. It's creative problem solving, critical thinking, taking responsibility, meeting deadlines. All those things that are really part and parcel to this type of activity of a group producing a video story for broadcast. All those things just are really must-haves. For the thing to succeed. But when I was getting to that, I didn't realize that was a big deal in education until the teachers turned on and said, "Hey," and it wasn't so much about, "Hey, my students are learning how to compose a shot." No, they're learning how to figure out what happens when they need to get the mayor on camera and his schedule is full.
Right. Yeah.
It's and that's the quote real world.
Yeah.
You're putting them in an uncontrolled. There's nothing less controlled than going out and doing a news story. Because you're throwing them out into a world that they have really no control over.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's and when the kids are really executing those skills at a high level, then you can start to imagine that they gain confidence, right? Because when you're really growing in your confidence and your skills, and then you can start to imagine that those skills are being applied everywhere else besides the Hikino program that they're in, And you've had those discussions with your educators about this.
Yeah, and with some of the graduates, some of the students.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Robert, roughly how many Hikino episodes have been made since the program began? Here you are in your 10th year.
We actually counted. So it was, and now we have to add a few more because there's been about 3 more. Mm-hmm. So 1,140.
Wow.
Something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What a number. And so now, Robert, that we know that number, like, what makes for a great episode? In other words, what is the DNA of a great Hikino episode? And I'm not wanting you to describe an episode. I'm actually wanting you to sort of parse out what the DNA of an episode, a great episode, is.
It's funny because it is sort of it's like alchemy. We don't really know. We have a hunch that maybe a good one is coming down the pike. And they're all good. They have to be to air. They're all good.
Yeah.
But the special ones are really when we, the team here, a very small team, are pleasantly surprised by the diversity. And the mix and match, quality of the show. Where we have there's a story from McKinley, an urban school, and there's a story from Hana, a rural school, and there's kind of a funny story, and there's a tragic story, and there's it's sort of like just throwing all these disparate ingredients into a pot. And just being surprised that, hey, it actually tastes pretty good when you put them all together, and that's that was kind of the neat thing about the format of the show that really kind of became a necessity. early on we thought maybe we could do theme shows and the schools could work together and all, do like stories for one episode and it would all make sense. We found out pretty quickly that just wasn't practical. That the schools were so different and on different schedules and didn't have time to talk to one another really.
Right.
So we said, okay, everyone just pitch us your stories, regardless of what the topic is. And so then to design a episode, it really came down to, okay, who's going to be ready?
Yeah.
And so just by that happenstance and the fact that we're in so many different types of schools on all the islands, you get that really great, that rich diversity. And so there are times when the differences of the 6 or 7 or 8 stories that are in the episode really click to make something special. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I think the follow-up question to that is, which digs a little bit more into the DNA of a particular segment, not the whole Hikino episode, but a segment that's produced by a school. And so I read an article in Honolulu Magazine titled 5 Hikino Stories That Changed the Game for Hawaii Student News Network. And so we don't have unlimited time, Robert, unfortunately, to talk about all 5. But what episode or what 2 episodes stick out in your mind as remarkable enough to fit into that category of change the game?
Oh, stories as opposed to full half-hour episodes.
Correct.
Well, there were those 5, and the interesting thing was the writer of the article, Christy Young, asked myself and our managing editor, Sue Yim, to come up with those, and we came up with the same ones. So I think the first one that chronologically was a story by an 8th grader at the time at Waianae Intermediate, Crystal Sabeto, and this was about her dealing with her mother who has terminal cancer. Now that sounds like maybe it was a special story because it was about dealing with, being a young person with a parent who's going to die. But and that was kind of a game changer. But really, was the breakthrough was that it really was a study about her, Crystal, the daughter, and how she changed, and it was just so honest and so revealing. To be able to do a story about how someone changes internally was just a breakthrough for us. And basically the change was she had to grow up a little bit. And the fact that this really very fragile, complicated story was pulled off with such finesse by these 7th and 8th graders just blew us away. And so it showed us that hey, Hikino stories can be very personal and at the same time very, very cogent. And so it was more of a breakthrough of I think the quality of storytelling.
There was another story cited in that article that both you and Sue came to the same conclusion about a transgender issue at a school, which I found remarkable because that was way before that issue really came up on the national radar screen and has been part of the national conversation. What was that about?
That was about a young woman had been born a male and is identifying as female in middle school in the 8th grade. The teacher, Luann Higuchi, came to us with the story. That's the process. You pitch the idea, and that really tested us. This was pretty early on in Hikino, and we've never rejected a story based on subject matter, or thinking, well, that subject matter is too deep. 7th and 8th graders can't handle it. So we gave it the green light, and it was just, again, perhaps breakthrough on the subject matter, but really more so on the treatment of it. And they really took it to the PBS standard that we talked about before, where they told this very heated, topic of transgender students, just extremely fairly and objectively, and with empathy for the character, the main character. Mm-hmm. And they really resisted what I think most adult news journalists would really have a hard time resisting, and that is they didn't exploit the story. They didn't exploit it for its sensationalism or the curiosity, factor, or the emotion, and that's proven time and time again. That really, I think, I sound biased, but that actually makes a lot of Hikino stories better than what their adult counterparts, how they would handle it. And it's actually played out in that case. Hawaii News Now saw the story and picked it up and said, "Hey, we got to do a story on this student," and they did, and it was nowhere near as good. Very objectively, I have to say.
Yeah. And that circles us back to when I asked you about, what that gold standard is. And the first thing that you said, really the top quality is that fairness that you bring as a journalist to a story.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's really, maybe the viewers aren't quite aware of it, but they're aware on some level. When you're watching public television, you're making an agreement with the viewer, and you can't breach that agreement, which is, I'm not going to pull the wool over your eyes. I'm not conning you. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm not trying to convince you of my beliefs or point of view. I'm just telling you a story, and you take from it what you want.
Yeah, that's very inspiring, Robert. It hope for the world, because as these young journalists possibly go into the field, they're going to bring that high standard to the work that they're doing, and we'll get better journalism.
I hope so.
That's awesome. So, hey, everybody, stay with us. After this short break, we will come back with more questions for Robert Pennybacker.
This is Guy Kawasaki. If you want to learn how to be a remarkable person, please check out my podcast, Remarkable People. I interview people like Roy Yamaguchi, Margaret Atwood, Jane Goodall, Stephen Wolfram, Steven Pinker, Ariana Huffington, and Steve Wozniak. The point of the podcast is to help you become a little bit more remarkable. To learn more, go to remarkablepeople.com. Thank you.
Hawaii's business people and professionals want to support our public high school students across the state, like me, Law Yagovich, a senior at Ku'uku High School. And Hawaii's teachers and other educators want classroom speakers, curriculum advice, contest judges, mentors, and other support from businesses and nonprofits. The Climb High Bridge is Hawaii Department of Education's official platform to connect the two communities. It's like Match.com, specifically designed to connect businesses and schools. Learn more by sending an email to info@climbhigh.org. That's spelled CLIMBHI.org.
Hi, friends. Toy Hirschman here from the Entre Ed Talk podcast. I am super excited to support the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast, hosted by none other than the amazing Josh Rapoon. And I also want to give a big shout out to all of the incredible educators in Hawaii who are doing unreal things in the entrepreneurship and design-based thinking spaces. I hope you all subscribe and listen to What School Could Be in Hawaii. And also, hey, why not check out the Entre Ed Talk podcast, where we interview stellar entrepreneurial educators and entrepreneurs from across the country and globe. I cannot wait to connect with you.
Hey everyone, this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast, and we are back with Robert Pennybacker, the Vice President for Learning Initiatives at PBS Hawaii. So Robert, I want to return to something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, which had to do with, the educators who advise these programs and help coach and mentor and guide these Hikino programs at the various schools. And I want to talk about one of your Hikino educators, Kevin Matsunaga. I pulled a quote from a Hawaii News Now article about how our schools dominated a national student news competition in San Diego. And in the article, Kevin stated, and I quote, "Hawaii schools have proven once again that they can compete with anyone across the nation in digital media. The students' performance here is proof positive that our Hawaii digital media teachers and students are doing great work." So my objective in this podcast, Robert, is to highlight the work of epic educators and education leaders, and even, folks like you who are working with educators. But in this case, I'm going to ask you to do the highlighting. So what makes Kevin special in the context of media education?
Yeah, he is a really special case. Someone to really look up to. When that quote is interesting because it's very true. And in fact, the Hawaii schools and pretty much all of them are Hikino schools. Percentage-wise, had dominated that competition, that national competition, to the point where I think the mainland schools were really angered by Hawaii schools, weren't very happy about Hawaii being there. Honestly, because it's a very competitive event. But with Kevin, interestingly, I think the reason his students do so well is what I talked about, is that connection. And I don't know what his background is in media. He certainly learned a lot at this point, but I think his true talent is with teaching and motivating students. Mm-hmm. And there's so many things that his group of students do on these trips. When they were trips, this year was virtual. He has students pair off as mentors and mentees. He has these activities where the students write secret messages to one another, telling that student how does it work? Each student gets a assignment to observe another student. Mm-hmm. But that other student doesn't know who's observing them. They're just all going about their way. And in the end, the observer writes notes to the student they're observing, saying what impressed them about how that student carried themselves, mm-hmm. or what they've learned about it. So that has nothing to do with media. It's mm-hmm. just team building and personal skills and really building personal relationships. I think really that's his focus and his strength, and the fact that they do well in the competition is a byproduct of it. Mm-hmm. And they all say it isn't about winning, and you hear that a lot. When someone says that in sports, that's BS, right? It is about winning, but in this case, it really isn't. Mm-hmm. The winning is kind of a nice surprise at the end. It really was what was the experience, the human to human experience that you've had. What did you learn from it? What did you learn about yourself and your peers, and the other hundreds and hundreds of students that are here at that competition? Mm-hmm. And that's to me what I've observed. That's really the core of what Kevin does as a teacher.
Wow, that's really cool, Robert. I mean, if I were a teacher, if I were a media teacher, whatever kind of teacher, I happen to be, I could take that idea and implement it. that idea of having students observe each other, secretly, and then provide feedback. That's just, I love stuff like that. And it keeps pointing to the idea, Robert, that the source of innovation in education is really the teachers. That's where it comes from, because they do these kinds of things. So kind of along the same lines, Robert, there's this PBS Hawaii documentary titled Aloha Atlanta Hiki no at the Student Television News Competition. And at the 18-minute mark, Kevin says several very remarkable things. This is a 27-minute film, and including his observations about how the competition forces kids to collaborate and cooperate with each other and develop relationships with each other. Something he says, and this is back in 2016, he says is dying because of mobile devices and other forces. So I just wonder what your thoughts are about that. It really struck me when I heard him say that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think he maximizes the benefit of that activity in that it's sort of sink or swim. This group of students has to bond with one another or they're going to sink, because it's really a incredible situation that this competition is set up, where students from across the country go to a strange city that gets picked every year and are thrown to the wolves. They've got to go out, and the adults cannot intervene. Mm-hmm. They have to go out on their own, and even as young as middle schoolers, and in a strange city. I guess the parents are kind of in the perimeter to make sure nothing bad happens, but they have to go out and find a story, to ask strangers if they can do a story on them, do the story, run back to their hotel room, write and edit it in the span of a few hours. Now, I couldn't do that as a professional. I would say forget that. So they really. It's a sink or swim. It's throwing them at the deep end of the pool. You got to hold on to one another, or you're going to sink. Mm-hmm. And I think he recognizes that is really the true benefit of that event, and focuses on that more than on the technical skills or on winning. Really,
Right. So he's maximizing the opportunities embedded in this for building teams and for building relationships.
Yes. And it's sort of, we call it Hikino on steroids, because that is the Hikino process, but the Hikino process has adults helping along the way, and it's much more drawn out, and you don't run out and find a story. You develop it, and so it's just condensing really the whole Hikino experience into a few hours.
Right. So Robert, in the final seconds of this film, Aloha Atlanta, Kevin notes that all skills, habits, and dispositions that he observed in Atlanta at that point, all the research, the discovery, the writing, the interpersonal and technological skills should be, quote, on the test, by which I take him to mean like no standardized metric could ever capture what was actually happening. And I think he's making a larger comment about education and the ways that we can capture learning along a journey instead of at these discrete moments where you take a test or write a paper. What are your thoughts about that?
I absolutely agree. And he just articulated it so well. That's the frustration that we live with Hikino. We're a grant-funded operation, and most of the grants come from education funders, and they want metrics and they want data, and people who evaluate and record successes from students don't seem to have come up with a way to do that satisfies the powers that be. And that's the real frustration, because it's kind of like we see it happening, we see it in front of our eyes, but how do you put that down on paper, and so I think it behooves the system, whatever the system is, to figure out how to do that, because they're missing the opportunities of a lot of bright kids falling through the cracks because they didn't get the right grades or the right test scores, but they're brilliant at other things. You know? And a lot of it is the proof for Hikino. The proof is in the story. Watch the story. Kids did this, you know? This is brilliant. Isn't this enough? But apparently it isn't. So it's, you know, but it's what gets you out of bed every morning, you know, to fight the fight.
Yeah, it sure gets me out of bed every morning. I'm definitely into fighting that fight. So Robert, we're coming down to the end here. This has been awesome. I've got several more things I want to ask you about. Briefly, as we come to the end of our time, I want to talk, unfortunately, about the COVID-19 pandemic. So describe how Hikino, really in its 10th year, right, writ large responded to the pandemic. Like, what pivots had to happen? How did the process of storytelling change for Hikino teams across the islands because of COVID?
Yeah, it was a complete turnaround. I would say it wasn't a pivot. It was it was a 360. And again, it's really it's great when circumstances force things to that end up actually evolving the program in ways we wouldn't have predicted. So the timing was such that when it was announced that COVID-19 was a worldwide pandemic and the lockdowns happened, it was right on the heels of our next round of new shows, and so there were no stories in the can. We had nothing, and at that time the lockdown was quite severe, and students were in their homes. And it didn't take long for us to figure out, well, they're in their homes. That's where the stories are happening now. What's going on with families? They have phones. We've resisted using phones as the core cameras for Hikino, but they have phones, and they can make the pictures look pretty good. So they and the teachers really have to credit them. They did not throw in the towel. They said, they're in school now, even though at that time last spring, everything was just like extra credit, right? Nothing was being graded. But they said, we want our students to be active. We don't want them to fall through the cracks. So yes, let's have them do Hikino projects. And it created a new genre of Hikino story called the student reflection, which kind of really broke our format rules, not our journalistic rules, but our format rules, where the format was now the student talking to the camera about what they're experiencing in school and in the home, and I think they became the eyes to for the rest of the state for how the pandemic was impacting students, families, and the schools from their perspectives. But it still had to be a story. It was not a rant, and so we came up with different guidelines to structure the story, and again to meet those PBS standards. And I think that format is going to stick with us through this and beyond, because we tapped into something that we hadn't tapped into before, which is really the direct perspective of the students. And it's an interesting thing, because we learned that you can do that and still have them remain objective. It's really interesting. They are in a sense reporting on themselves. They have to stand outside themselves and their situation and report on what is going on in their lives and shape it into a story. So I think it really was, no one wanted or predicted this pandemic, but it really forced a change in a new direction that has really blossomed for us, I think.
Yeah. A true silver lining, innovation in the middle of a crucible. That's really marvelous, Robert.
Yeah.
So, look, there's a couple more things here as we come down to the end. I always like to ask guests some big philosophical question. We've already touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to return to it. So, last year I read a book by David Epstein titled Range. Epstein examined the world's most successful athletes, artists, musicians, inventors, forecasters, and scientists, and he discovered that in most fields, especially those that are complex and unpredictable, generalists, not specialists, are primed to excel. So generalists often find their path late, and they juggle many interests rather than focusing on one, and they're also more creative, more agile, able to make connections in their more specialized peers can't see, at least according to Epstein's argument. So, Robert, what do you think about this idea? I'm especially interested because you appeared to specialize early in creative media, but your resume literally reads like Renaissance man.
I'm not quite sure what you mean, Renaissance man. I basically I've been a storyteller, and I've gone into management because I had to make a living. That's sort of the natural progression in Hawaii. If you want to make a living wage, you kind of climb the ladder up to management. Well, in terms of his argument, I think there's something to be said, but I would just alter a little bit. I think there's a real benefit in being a generalist because you know what goes into the making of a product. Mm-hmm. You may not be good at all of it, and that's where the difference is. So you seek out help from peers and from collaborators who are better at the specific jobs that that it takes to create the product. But I think the benefit of being a generalist is knowing that she's a terrific camera person.
Yeah.
He's a terrific editor. Knowing what is good, basically. Knowing what is good. Having good taste. And being able to see that in other people. So I don't know if that makes sense, but so I kind of half agree with him, mm-hmm. but I would diverge by saying that once you become a generalist and you know your subject really, your field really well, the value is that you know what's good, but you should then realize that you're not necessarily the best person to do to do the job, and that's when you need the specifics. So maybe that's what a director is. And they say a director really doesn't have any talent. They see the talent in the other people and they put the right people together to make it work. That's really true. I kind of joke, but at film school, I didn't know I wanted to be a director. I actually wanted to be an editor, but I was terrible at coiling cable. I could not coil it so it didn't twist and bind. Yeah. And they all laughed and said, you better be a director. You can't do this stuff.
That's
but we need the coil cable. We need the coil.
Yeah. Cabler.
Cable stringers or whatever you call it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, Robert. I had this marvelous experience last fall where I was finishing my second film, which is also about education. It's called The Innovation Playlist, and I did it in partnership with Wine Icy Writer Productions. And because of COVID, it ended up being John Allen as my editor and myself. And what I came to understand, my strength is in organizing the storytelling of the film. John's strength is the editing and the magic qualities of music and B-roll and the way the thing comes together to make the storytelling really work. And what I learned is that I could never be that editor who works with Final Cut Pro and does all of those incredible things that he does with his mouse. But I am really good at sort of seeing how the bigger picture was emerging. So I hear you about that. It also implies that you come to know the specialties of other people when you're working with other people. So if you're working entirely alone on something, if you're a dentist and all you see is patients all day long, then you may not ever get that benefit, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting conversation. So finally, Robert, as we come to the end here, I want to end by talking about polar bears. So my wife, Cheryl Ansey, who you have worked with over the years in media, told me that you and your wife took a special trip to see polar bears.
Yeah.
So when was this, and why polar bears, and what was the coolest thing about that trip?
Let's see. It was about 4 years ago. We're animal lovers. We have many pets, and we're, like many people, really, the polar bear is kind of the poster child of what's happening to the world with climate change, and it's a very real thing. And so we went on a tour by this organization that we contribute to, World Wildlife Foundation, and they work with a tour company called NatHab, Natural Habitats, and they sent us the mail, the junk mail, and they caught us. I mean, it was just one of those things where we said,
wow, we
really should do this, and we went, and I'd never been to Canada, and so you fly into Winnipeg and then fly actually into the Arctic Circle, the southern part of the Arctic Circle, so not the North Pole, into Saskatchewan, Canada, and a small town called Churchill, and that's where the mothers and the cubs are traversing up to the ice, and it happens every year, in the fall, and the coolest thing was really what everyone goes there for. We were there with a small group in these huge Land Rovers that were built specifically to be able to just drive over the tundra, no roads. And there was a male hanging out, and we parked and we said, "Look, let's see what happens." And very large male polar bear was curious and came up and hung out with us and stood up on his hindquarters and stuck his nose into the bus window. And
wow,
it was just one of those, and everyone was very quiet because, you could scare him away. And it was just, we took pictures, and it was just one of those moments that we'll never forget.
Wow, that just sounds like magic.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. So, Robert Pennybacker, thank you for being on this show, and thank you times millions for all the opportunities that you have given young people in the state of Hawaii to find their voices and their storytelling skills. And we wish you and your family good health in the weeks and months ahead as we hopefully navigate towards the end of this pandemic.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for doing what you do, and thanks for having me on. It's fun.
Okay, Robert, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thank you, awesome and epic listeners, for supporting this podcast and giving it 100% 5-star rating. We appreciate you, and thank you for all your wonderful written reviews. This podcast is inspired by the book What School Could Be. To join the What School Could Be community, and wow, what an incredible community it is, go to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. If you love these episodes with remarkable, innovative, and imaginative educators and education leaders, please give us your own rating and write us a review at your favorite podcast store. The What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Your host is me, Josh Rapoon. My editor, show consultant, and sound engineer is Daniel Gilad at DG Sound Creations. Daniel, an amazing musician, created the original theme music heard in these episodes. To learn more about Daniel or to hire him for your next music gig, see our show notes where you will find his Facebook and website URL. This series is funded by education change agent Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the acclaimed documentary film Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book What School Could Be. Send your feedback to mltsinhawaii@gmail.com and follow us on Twitter @MLTSinHawaii. Finally, please like our Most Likely to Succeed in Hawaii Facebook page and YouTube channel. Please, listeners, stay safe, wear a mask, stay physically distant from one another, and for the love of the gods, get vaccinated. Most of all, consider bringing kindness and compassion into the world. We need a surplus of both right now. Until the next episode, a hui ho.